Good evening, everybody. KB5 MIQ Big Boy. Had a little video request. Asked for a little deeper dive into info on tube radios, both receivers and transceivers and transmitters. So we're going to recap a few things I've talked about. I got a little more information I'm going to add on here. Now, the series of pictures going to be behind all of this. Jeff and Tim both have tube gear. They have some tube receivers. Jeff's actually got a old set of Konar twin single tube CW transmitter and receiver. Runs off crystals, and I think it's a QRP rig. 80, 40, 20, and 15, I believe, is the bands on it. CW only, single tube. And there'll be a picture of the Konar twin side by side, but there'll be another picture where I zoomed in on the transmitter where you can see the crystal socket for the frequency. Plus, there'll be a picture of his crystals. His old Hallicrafters receiver that he rebuilt completely from the ground up. Have a picture of it on there inside and out. Tim's got that Hammerland HQ on 180, I believe, and an old Grundig receiver, a tube receiver. Have pictures of both of those inside and out at the end of this. Now, Tim and Jeff, I appreciate y'all sending me those pictures. One thing, tube radios, I got licensed in 91, and I'm pretty sure they'd already quit manufacturing, but I think they were still manufacturing some Kenwood and Yaesus all the way up to the late 80s. All right, I've mentioned this before. You see a lot of tube gear coming up for sale. MTC's got some tube gear. eBay's covered up in it. I've seen it at sidewalk sales and things like that. Number one thing to remember on tube gear, if it doesn't have a power supply built in it, you need the matching power supply for that unit because you just can't hook them straight 13.8 volts. All those tubes run on different voltages. The Heath kits especially had separate matching power supplies for whatever model radio they was running, and it took a specific cabling set up and plug to hook it up. So you got to have both of them running. I don't know why when people find them, unless they're just getting the transceiver, not the power supply, why they split them up. Look like to me it'd be a better deal to set price a little higher price, sell them as a complete unit. And every once in a while you'll see somebody list one. There was one listed a while back, a complete HW101 station, the power supply, radio, I think external speaker, Heathkit mic, every option you could get with it, they had it listed. That's something you got to think about. Now, some of the rigs had onboard power supplies built in them. Now, remember this, you're talking about a radio that's a minimum of 40 years old. And if you go all the way back into some of the 60s and early 70s stuff, they're even older. So more than likely, you're going to have some tune-up work done on it. Probably need lines, without a doubt, all electrolytic capacitors have to be replaced, stuff like that. Now, here's something good about it. When you work on those old tube rigs, most of that stuff's chassis mounted, which gives you a little room to work on it instead of trying to work on what I tried to work on in my last video. Gives you a little more space to work on things. But as the tube rigs progressed, a lot of them became what was, like Jeff always used the term, hybrid rigs. Well, they had some transistors in them and wasn't all complete tubes. I believe his HW101, he called it a hybrid rig where it had some transistor cards in it along with the tube finals. So something else to think about. Also, purchasing those and having them shipped. They're heavy, the tubes are fragile, and I've seen a lot of shippers, especially if they were ham radio operators and they knew the rig was in good shape, would almost refuse to ship it. They'd agree to meet you within such far a radius of wherever it's from. Hey, ham radio cat, come on up here. I was wondering where you was at. Something else to think about. Is they're heavy, and they take up a lot of room. So shipping can be an issue with them. They make good radios. The 520 Kenwoods are still real popular. I see a lot of them. The Yaesu FT101 series, I never heard anything bad about any of those radios. I think the last one was an FT101ZD. Something to think about there. Kenwood 520, 820, 830Ss, real good. A lot of those had a lot of filtering in them. They were really good, especially what contesters call a contester radio. But it's tube technology. It's old technology, so you're just gonna have to either be prepared to pay somebody to do some work on it, or work on it yourself. Now, one good thing with the internet being what it is, anything I have looked up lately, I have always been able to find a PDF manual on it. Like I'd lost manuals from my newer radios, and with this Heathkit SWR watt meter I've got, I found the manual on it online as they were printed off. So if you get an older radio that don't have a manual, more than likely you'll be able to find a manual for it. Jeff sent me a good link, and I talked on this before because tube rigs have to be set up right on the band you're going to be operating on. And I use that term before I use the term what people really call it, because I don't want anybody to get confused. And I was going to try to get a little more in depth and maybe call some of the circuitry what it was supposed to, but I was afraid I'd make a mistake. I don't have a tube rig here to use as a visual reference, so I'm going to do this in a more general explanation, and I hope it makes sense. You younger hams, you see a lot of guys talking about tuners and running a tuner with an end-fed antenna or whatever. You're also going to hear the term tuning a tube radio. And a lot of these old stations, you always saw the old Heathkit antenna, 1 gallon dummy load, oil-filled dummy load, or some kind of a heavy-duty dry dummy load, because before you tune the antenna, you have to tune the tubes to the frequency and band you're going to be operating on, because every one of those tube rigs has got 2 knobs on the very front of them, load and plate. And what you're doing is tuning the circuitry and the tubes to the frequency you're going to operate on. Now, I may get this term messed up, so some of you guys can correct me. But one part of the tuning is when you're tuning the plate, you look for the dip on the needle, and that tells you hit resonance for that part of it. And the other is the load for how much output power you're going to put out. Tube rigs are a little more forgiving for SWR mismatch than, say, a transistor final rig is, but still, they need to be set up and tuned right. Also, if you're familiar with a tube amplifier, which they still make today, it's the same process. You still had to tune the amplifier to the frequency you're going to operate on. Now, tuning the antenna is the next step. That gets back to using the auto tuner and tuning your antenna. Most of these guys, they tuned them tube rigs or amp, tuned it into a dummy load first to get it set up right, and then if they had to tune the antenna, that was the second step. So don't get the two confused. It's 2 totally different operations. What I have been able to understand, though, it doesn't take, once you get used to it, it doesn't take just a couple of minutes to set up a tube radio. So, another thing with tube radios, one of the hams giving my novice ticket told me he always wanted to keep his college rig around was he claimed that tube radios weren't affected by an EMP event, electromagnetic pulse event. I don't know if the later tube radios that were hybrid would be affected or not, but something to think about. The old Collins KWM2, I believe, tube HF rig was the Cadillac in its day of HF radios. It's the one radio with all That was the holy grail of tube radios at one time. The Kenwood 520S is though an excellent radio, and you see a lot of them for sale. One thing of the really older tube rigs, like the early FT101s, the early Tempos, I don't know if the Swans did, but a lot of them had 11 meters on them. Made them really popular with the CB crowd. And matter of fact, the first ham com in Arlington, Texas, I ever went to, an old boy there was local town. He knew this guy trying to sell this radio, but he was from that town. He told me, he said, "You see that Yaesu FT101E sitting there?" He said it ain't never been switched off 11 meters. He bought it brand new and has always used it on the CB band. He was a CBer. They ain't knocking that. They used them. It wasn't legal, but it happened. Tube receivers, I've seen a lot of them out there, and that might be, if you wanted to get into something to do a little repair on and be an easy thing to repair and work on, if you got more room in there to mess with them. But be very, very careful with the capacitors, the transformers and them things, because some of them voltages on those tubes may be very low amperage, but it may be 1,000 volts. It's a good way to get hurt. So be really, really careful messing with that stuff. I hope that kind of gives a little more information out there about tube rigs. I've always kind of had my eye out for one. And hadn't bought one yet, but may someday if I can find the right one. I'd love to find an old complete Heath kit, either an SB102 or an HW101, that I could go through, and since there'll be a little more room in it than this clock thing I built. All right, guys, I appreciate everybody who subscribed to the channel. We're sitting at 622. I don't understand still have trouble understanding YouTube. One day I'm at 623, one day I'm at 622, it may be 624 tomorrow, who knows. But again, I appreciate everybody who enjoys listening to me, and spread the word. I don't mind trying to help a new ham with anything or any ham. My email's posted on my QRZ page. KB5MIQ is my call. Remember, Main Trading Company, Paris, Texas. He's got some big sales going on right now during Ham Benching Week. Always got a lot of used gear on there. Remember your Facebook pages. Ham Radio Flea Market Trading Post, Ham Radio, Amateur Radio Elmer's, Texas Amateur Ham Radio, Club pages, Farmersville Amateur Radio, 4 States Amateur Radio, Dallas, Cowtown, Shreveport Amateur Radio. Excellent avenues for information, especially if you're interested in becoming a ham. We're still trying to hold a round table 4 nights a week. Generally, we're in there. I got once every once in a while. Some of us are out of pocket, but we're still trying to be in there on 10 meters. Band's been kind of open. We've been moving from 28, 450, 460, 470. That's usually where we try to stay at. We're always going to stay at a novice tech portion, a 10. Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, Friday nights start at 7:30 Central Standard Time. If you hear any of these 4 call signs, KB5MIQ, WD5HKV, W5DLX, or KI5TKY, that's us. Be sure to check in. Let us know you're in there. Appreciate everybody who subscribed to the channel. This is KB5MIQ, Big Boy, 73.